control the vertical.
Welcome to Anthologic, the TV anthology podcast. I am your host, Mark. Anthologic is a podcast dedicated to exploring the good, the bad, and the odd of horror, science fiction, and the best of mystery suspense anthology shows and series on TV. Join me as we slip through the cracks of reality to approach the extremes of experience, where we can peruse the stories and art of a sinister fairground of strange and wonderful rides. And now we go on to the show that is the focus of this particular episode. Welcome to this episode of Anthologic with your host Mark. Today I'm covering an episode of The Twilight Zone. It's an interesting one because it's a two-parter. We have no little silly short stories or any of that. Both stories are treated fairly seriously, though there's a little humour in the second one. But I think the reason for this is the first story, when people saw the script and got the story, they felt it needed to be treated properly. And in fact, I think there was an idea that it could be award-winning, in fact. And I think what that they did was, the first story is kind of a standout, but they didn't want to pair it with anything goofy. I think they wanted to put this forward for a TV award. So they treated both stories with some reverence. And it's got a hell of a cast, the first story too. This episode was first broadcast on December the 15th, 1971. It is the number 13 in number 13 of season 2. So it's about the 20th one or something. I don't know, something like that. And what's happened here is Rod Serling is is a Jewish man. And is exploring some aspects of sort of Hebrew lore, mythology, and combining it with kind of Christian lore and mythology. Because so sort of Christmas and Hanukkah are significant elements to this. Interestingly, also, this is the last episode broadcast before Christmas of that year. So the story itself was written by Rod Serling and it was directed by Don Taylor. The Messiah on Mott Street. Now, it's basically Edward G. Robinson, which is quite the find, quite the catch, I should say. And apparently he was always worried he was going to get fired, but apparently that was a thing with Edward G. Robinson. He felt that about everything he worked on, he'd get fired on his first day, which is kind of amazing when you see Edward G. Robinson now. Would anyone fire him for anything? Because he always delivers. And he plays an old man who's looking after his grandson, but he feels that he's getting near the end of his time. There's a doctor come to see him. Doctor played by Tony Roberts. Tony Roberts probably best known as often being a friend of Woody Allen in some of Woody Allen's earlier films. If you saw him, you'd recognise him, I think, if you know Woody Allen films. For example, he plays his friend in Play It Again, Sam and Annie Hall. Also on the cast, and I really thought he gave a great performance here, is Yaphet Kotto as a guy called Buckner. Yaphet Kotto is an interesting character because though he's an African American, he is actually Jewish. I believe he was raised by a Jewish family and took the faith, which is kind of interesting because Judaism isn't a faith that is always endeavouring to recruit new people. It's not a evangelical faith. It's kind of, if you're not a Jew and you want to be a Jew, I think there are several hurdles to overcome, but Yaphet Kotto was that. And it's interesting that they picked him for this story, and he's really good in this. Essentially, this old man is like angry and railing at things because he knows he hasn't got much time and he wants his grandson looked after. and he keeps talking about the Messiah giving us salvation. Now, the Messiah is obviously an interesting key word here, because in Christianity, Jesus is the Messiah, not necessarily so well, not at all in Judaism, but there was always this belief that a Messiah would give salvation, and that's what he's talking about. However, his young grandson kind of appreciates, kind of takes this to heart, and at some point his grandpa's not well, and he goes onto the streets kind of looking for the Messiah, because there's like this belief the Messiah's out there somewhere, and he's stumbling around these city streets. I don't know if it's meant to be in New York. I think it is, actually. Actually, reading into this, apparently it was the New York idiom among Jews in New York was used heavily in the script. And Edward G. Robinson comes from that background, but toned it down. He didn't want to appear to be giving a coarse performance, I believe, or indeed revert back to a sort of an idiom he'd left behind. But they came to a middle ground in this, and it worked well. And apparently he occasionally would be put off during his sort of monologues by something going on. But when he did the scenes, he would do them in one take, know all the words. He was a pro, right? So that's kind of interesting. Anyway, the boy is on the streets, he's looking for the Messiah, and he meets one of these sort of thundering prophet types who's saying, "Yeah, beware, the end is nigh," and all this. And he sort of says to him, "Are you the Messiah?" But then this African American guy sort of steps in the way and says, "Go on, get lost," to this street preacher guy, and sort of says, "Hey, what can I do for you, kid?" Now, when Edward G. Robinson, I was talking to his grandson, he'd sort of say, "Yeah, the Messiah will, when he appears, he'll be big and black against the sky." And of course, this is a big black man, which kind of makes the grandson think he is the Messiah. His name's Buckner. He comes, he goes with the boy, and he kind of offers words of comfort. In many ways, this is similar to something like It's a Wonderful Life, say, or something like that. There's some slightly mysterious character offering hope and saying things, and there's some interesting interactions between Tony Roberts, the doctor of this man who's not well, and Buckner. And there's stuff going on, and they discuss but essentially, we do get scenes of Edward G. Robinson railing against the angel of death that's come to visit him. There's some interesting camera angles, interesting use of music. This is a really well put together episode. Really, really interesting. And there's also, slightly supernatural things happening in the background, like wind coming through the curtains to trigger something, and stuff like that. And interestingly, the cynical doctor who doesn't believe does to not believe any of this stuff that the old grandpa's saying, it reveals he is the son of a scholar, a rabbi, someone who understands the law. And he does believe in things like the angel of death and the Messiah and possibly miracles. So they... and there's also use of shadows to indicate the angel of death too. Buckner says to the doctor, let's not interfere here. There's nothing the doctor can do. And Levine actually says, anybody ever tell you make a lousy Messiah? Because the boy's been talking about him as the Messiah. The wind drops, and the man seems to be somewhat recovered. So, yeah. And then there's a cut scene where afterwards where no one seems to remember Buckner, and he turns up as the postman. But it's like everyone's had their memory wiped. And they kind of vaguely remember, but they don't. So, and the doctor's saying, was there someone in the living room? I don't know. Well, when just after the sort of old man recovers, the old man's pulse is stronger, he's breathing strong, and there's bells ringing for Christmas. And the Doctor says it's kind of a season for miracles. And there, again, there's a knock at the door. And there we see a postman, a big black man, who is our man Buckner, but as a different person. And he has a special delivery from the old gentleman's brother, who's repaying a debt of $10,000, which is an old debt. It does get mentioned earlier. And Levine, the Doctor, kind of wishes everyone a happy Hanukkah. So the Doctor walks out and he sees the postman kneeling by a postbox and sort of says, thank you for the letter. And the postman sort of says, did it please? And Levine says, yes, yeah, definitely pleased. And then the postman says, every now and then God remembers the tenements. And Levine kind of acts like, do I know this guy? And then the Christmas bells are ringing. Yeah, really interesting, because Rod Serling often usually didn't touch on sort of his Jewish heritage, but he did here. So it was really cool. It was really, really cool one. I really, really enjoyed this. And apparently when the script appeared over the production, they realised they were onto something special with this. And the NBC executives kind of thought it might be an award winner. And they got Don Taylor, they specifically got back because he directed like an award-winning episode from season 1, which is called The Tearing Down Tim Riley's Bar, which we covered. And it has that kind of feel, and it does have that vibe. I kind of see that. Having Robinson and Yaphet Kotto in this really adds some weight to it, and they really did a good job with the direction and the music as well. Really solid story. The second story in this pair was called The Painted Mirror. Now, interestingly, this has Zsa Zsa Gabor in this, and one of the main characters is a guy called Frank Standish. It's played by an actor called Arthur O'Connor, whose face you might know from sort of 60s TV. And there's another character called Ellen Chase, who's like the love interest of the man. But it turns out Zsa Zsa Gabor's character is called Mrs. Moore, is like has bought him out and allows him to stay, but in the end says, yeah. Oh, it's like an antique shop, I should have said. But in the end, she's sort of saying, no, I want you to clear out, kind of thing. So, and she's kind of shrewish, but I have to say, the story's fun, but it's a little let down by Zsa Zsa Gabor, who can't act. It frankly can't act. She talks in exactly the same tone, whatever is being said or whatever the emotional content is meant to be. She's just speaking. She's not acting. Let's put it that way. Anyway, they find this painted mirror. The old man and his girlfriend, whatever she is, find this painted mirror and they scrape off some of the paint and they see this weird prehistoric landscape behind it and like distant roar of monsters and things like that. And then they scrape more off and then they realise they can actually enter that world. And eventually, what actually happened is kind of tricky. This is a shorter story than the first one. The first one was a good half an hour and this one was more like 12, 15 minutes, something like that. Maybe even less, actually. They trick her into going in there because her dog goes in there and she sort of chases it. And basically they paint the mirror again and she's trapped there. And we hear these screams that clearly aren't Zsa Zsa Gabor. It's someone else doing the screaming. So again, that's kind of jarring, and it finishes. So it's kind of it's a bit more comedy than the first one, but it's still a reasonably good episode. It's they've closed the doorway on this woman, horrible woman. Gabor comments on the episode. She talked about it afterwards. Said the monsters and stuff like that did before. It was the horrible clothes that her character was given to wear. She says she was happy with the job she did, apart from the clothes she was forced to wear because they were tacky. Okay, fine. So a good episode all round. A very, very solid episode. I enjoyed this greatly, and I give it a big recommend. Okay, I'm going to wind it up there. But before I go, may I ask, is anybody out there?
I'm not. We now return control of your television set to you. Until next week at this same time, when the control voice will take you to